sleeping there, kind of, so to speak. Got on the show kind of late. I don't know what my deal was, but that's what was going on. I was standing by, but not mentally there, so to speak. Well, welcome back to the show. Ohio Exopolitics is focused on bringing the world the information in the Billy Meyer case, and it's been an interesting journey over the past 5 or 10 years as I've delved into this farther and farther. Here I find myself no longer following any of the other UFO extraterrestrial cases, and this has kind of become a hard to find the correct words for it, even because the teachings actually you start to focus on a daily basis, and it has a profound impact on your life. Billy is an 81-year-old man. He lives in a tiny mountain village in Switzerland. Actually, he lives behind a tiny mountain village in Switzerland called Schmidruti. His home is called Hinter Schmidruti, and it's located about 35 minutes east of Zurich. And Billy's written over 40 books. I had a guest on a couple weeks ago that said he's really written over 65 books or something like that. He's written 2,000 contact reports and hundreds of bulletins. If you read his books, they're really the greatest source of information on the planet, at least in my humble opinion. I've got a library here of maybe 300 books or so. I can't say I've read everything, but so Billy, his real name is Edward Albert Meyer. Sometimes he's referred to with the letters BEAM, Billy Edward Albert Meyer. He was born in Bulak, Switzerland on the 3rd of February, 1937. And just before World War II, he started to get these telepathic messages, and then eventually had face-to-face contacts with an extraterrestrial man named Svath. And Svath would land his silvery pear-shaped craft in Bulak, Switzerland. Billy lived a little farther north in Switzerland at this time when he was growing up in an area near the Eichenmoser and Bruder Mountains in a valley called the Glatt Valley. And this strange, back in 1943, this strange pear-shaped craft would land in a field there, and young Billy Meyer would walk over to the ship, and he would say that it felt like he was lifted up by ghostly hands. He was brought into the ship, and the ship would go up into Earth orbit somewhere. And Svath had an interesting way of teaching Billy. One of the things that always kind of was of interest to me is the way Svath would tell Billy about his previous lives, and I can always kind of imagine what it must be like to have someone tell you about your previous lives. It's an interesting notion if you think about it, you know. But Billy's previous lives, according to Meyer information, he's been the 7 prophets on Earth that we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. And in each of these lives, he taught this ancient teaching called the teaching of the Spirit. And the teaching of the Spirit was eventually twisted in both intentionally and unintentionally, because a lot of people on the earth really just didn't understand it. And it was twisted into our religions. It became Christianity, it became Islam, and then it became Judaism. And so these concepts and ideas were, part of the problem was that the scribes would write down what they wanted to or what they thought it said, and even though they were told certain things, but even as far as the New Testament is concerned, a lot of the disciples didn't understand Emmanuel's teaching. So what this whole mission is about now is to get this information down in writing so that future generations have it to understand. Perhaps Billy's most important book is called The Might of Thoughts. And The Might of Thoughts contains information which helps you control your thoughts. And we should be neutral positive at all times. And what it means to be neutral positive is that we're mostly in a neutral state of mind. For example, you should be confident, but not overconfident. You should be cheerful, but level-headed. You should be enthusiastic, but still realistic. We should be relaxed, but still alert. If you read through the book, The Might of Thoughts, Billy emphasizes confidence, optimism. He says we should be relaxed, we should be cheerful, we should be enthusiastic. And he also explains that we are the master of our own destiny and the forger of our own fortunes, and that we should always steer our thoughts and never let our thoughts drift. Now, the might of the thoughts is also related to your feelings. So, and the feelings come from your world of thoughts. Together, the thoughts and the feelings form a deadly might. And the fact is that thoughts and feelings exert a monstrous impact on your health. And it will even determine, in many cases, whether you live or you die. Another book is called The Way to Live. And a couple interesting passages from The Way to Live. To be without striving means unwillingness and affliction. Striving is one of the creational natural laws. Affliction is inhibited striving. So if to be happy, you have to be striving. It's the nature of the human being. So people, they get into great depressions. They get lost in sometimes alcoholism or drugs or pursuing, sex or some means of stimulation in some way. But really the only thing that will, the way the human being is designed is we're designed to strive. If you have inhibited striving, then you have stagnation, hopelessness, grief, confusion, irrationality. That's where most people are on earth. So your life should be focused on making yourself smarter, making your body better. You should be focused on your work in your day job. You should be organized at home. So you should always be focused on striving. If you do, harmony and happiness will be part of your life. If you don't, then you'll have grief and everything negative. So this is a creational natural law. It's one of the laws of nature. And what these writings do is they teach us about the laws of nature. Another book that Billy's written is called The Psyche. And one of the things the Psyche teaches you is how your own destiny can be won. How you can win your own destiny. And it gives you like definitions which are very helpful. Like the definition for the psyche, which is that blocker factor which controls the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness. Well, this we could do a whole another hour on the material consciousness. But you have a material consciousness. It's not the part of you that lives beyond this lifetime. It's a vehicle for your spirit form to evolve. Your spirit form is the part of you that never dies, that never sleeps. It records everything that you do. It's aware enough to monitor your material consciousness, and it will send it impulses. So whenever, if you, Semyase, Billy's third contact, said, if you've learned to pay attention to your spirit, it will tell you if your thinking is right or wrong. So we get kind of an impulse, a signal that our thinking is wrong. And then you feel a little bit of maybe an uncomfortable feeling or a slight tinge of sadness or something. Well, the spirit form is not alert enough to drive a car. It's not awake enough. It's not conscious enough to read a book or write a book. But it's monitoring your thoughts, and it's sending you these impulses. So this is the kind of stuff that the psyche teaches. It teaches us what the material consciousness is. And then you also have this spiritual consciousness, which is your spirit form, which never dies. It's a fragment of the universal consciousness. There's a super intelligence which runs our universe. It's neither good nor evil. I think I might have heard it as referred to as it power, which is strange to me. But I think the universe is strange. It's called a Wesenheiten in the German. It really doesn't have much of a say over its own evolution. It evolves according to these time spans, which are beyond our imagination. Time spans of like 155 trillion years. Our universe, our creation, which is called the Dern universe, is expanding right now. It has a parallel sister universe called the Tao universe, which is also expanding. Both universes are expanding, and new spirit forms are being created, and new worlds are being created. This is the expansion phase that we're in right now. And the universe is intelligent, but it has no personality. Now, it's hard for us to understand intelligence without a personality, because, you know, if you have animals and other people, then you know that everything that has an intelligence usually has a personality. But the universal consciousness is, I say sometimes it has more in common in many ways with a tree or the ocean or those kinds of life rather than human life. But everything within the human is also within the universe. In other words, we have self-similarity. If you've ever seen fractal geometry, like if you've ever looked and seen a plane, film or photograph a big river, you'll see these kind of curving that looks much like a snake when it moves. A river does, and all the separate tributaries off of the main body of the river, they have the same repeating patterns, just like a tree has the same branching structure. The mountain range has the same repeating pyramid structure. It's a variation on a pyramid, a variation on a triangle. So there's these repeating patterns in nature. And the intelligence that's behind our universe is different than humanity. It's not a human being. It's not a heavenly father. It's not a mother nature. It has never been angry or jealous. It's always in this neutral, positive state, just like our spirit form. Your spirit form cannot be harmed. It cannot be upset. It cannot be damaged. Your spirit form is a fragment of the universal intelligence. It can never die. It records everything you do. Whether you're asleep or not, it's always recording. Now, one of the things that I wanted to just throw in here as a side note is that if you do buy some of these books, like The Might of Thoughts, which you can get if you go out, I think it's theyfly.com, to Michael Horn's website, you can order the books. And let me tell you something. If you've only read the contact reports, you're only studying the Meyer case in a superficial way. you have not really got into the meat of things. So you really need to order these books like The Might of Thoughts and The Psyche and The Way to Live. And if you can, and I'm not real good about this too, your study time should begin and end daily at the same time. And it should never be more than 60 minutes, which I think is I can completely relate to that, because there's no way you can absorb anything beyond 60 minutes. So Billy has had contact with extraterrestrial human beings called the Plejaren, and they live in the Pleiades star system. They inhabit a world called Era, and Era is very Earth-like. It has the same kind of plant and animal life that we do. It's very, very similar. Its atmosphere is much thicker. Earth's atmosphere was much thicker hundreds of years ago before we've done 2,000 nuclear tests. So we've destroyed much of our ozone. We've destroyed much of our planet, and that's why our planet is in a devastating crisis. Now, Era is in its pristine state because the people there, the Plejaren, they live by the creational natural laws, the laws of the universe. So the contact reports, Billy's contact reports, can be divided into the Svath contact reports, the Askit contact reports, and the Pleiadian/Plejaren contact reports. Svath, I told you a little bit about. Askit was a woman from the Tao universe who mentored Billy from the time Billy was about 16 until he was 27 or so, another 11 years. The Pleiadian Plejaren contacts started with Semyase. She was involved in a accident which cut their reports, their interaction time down to about 2 or 3 years, and Billy still has contacts, mostly with Svath and Ptah. So the contact reports are important, but the most practical and important information comes from the books like The Might of Thoughts, The Way to Live, The Psyche, The Goblet of Truth. Again, these books they are originally written in German, and they go through a translation process. So the books that I have are 1 page German and 1 page English. They encourage you to try to learn German because I don't think you can completely understand the material the way you should unless you can start to read it a bit in German. And in the German, they contain an evolution code which works subconsciously in the reader, which is to me very interesting. The German is very close to what's called the Lyrian. The first people, our ancestors are from Lyra Vega, and they populated the Milky Way galaxy a long, long time ago. The Plejaren descend from these people as well. Just to briefly talk about Askit quickly, Tao universe is our sister universe. It was created 46 trillion years ago. Askit left the Tao universe to come here to be Billy's second mentor, and she sent a robotic craft to Switzerland, and it landed on top of this hill where Billy would meditate or where he would think. Billy was about 16 years old at this time. This craft landed on the hill on a cold evening in Bulak, Switzerland. And Billy, when he entered the craft, he saw that there was no pilot. It was a robotic ship. There was a large flash of light. It started to move over Billy's house where he lived. And Billy noticed that he could no longer see the ship or his body anymore. And this invisible craft took off with great speed towards the Middle East, And Billy talked about seeing the sun in the night sky and a beautiful circular earth, and he saw the Indian Ocean. When the ship landed, he stepped out of the craft and he saw red sand and red rocks. He was in Jordan, and it's quite a contrast to the cold winter evening in Switzerland back home. And then he saw a falling star coming down out of the sky, a descending light. It became larger and larger, and he realized he was looking at a disk some 300 meters in diameter. Well, he had to sit and wait for about a half an hour until Ascot got out of the craft. And one of the interesting things is that Billy, when he first saw her, he knew right away that he knew her, but he could never put any more detail to it than that. He had known her from previous lives, and eventually they left in her ship, and they went to the Great Pyramid, and they went far below the Great Pyramid into these old cubicle constructions that were 73,000 years old. And this is where Billy, when he was 16 years old, he saw the Giza intelligences. And he was inside this giant space below the pyramids that seemed to be illuminated by a light that came from everywhere and nowhere. And he saw strangely dressed guards. He saw a gigantic craft and smaller ships down there. And he saw these strangely dressed guards. And he saw something, a whole series of artifacts when he was there that looked like artifacts from the crucifixion. So anyway, this is a gigantic summary after 11 years of various trips, and Billy learned very much from Ascot. She returned to the Tao universe. So in the next 11 years, Billy, he lived somewhat of a normal life, and he met a Greek woman named Calliope. They got married, and they left back for Switzerland. They had 3 kids. And right around 1975, Billy started to get contacts again. This time with a woman named Semyase. She would land her ship near Billy's home in Hinterschmidruti, and Billy would ride his moped out to the meetings. He'd often sit down under a tree, and she would come out of her ship. And Semyase taught Billy many things about the creation, about Earth history, about the spiritual teachings. During this time, Colonel Wendell Stevens took a great interest in the case. Colonel Stevens had been interested in the UFO phenomena for quite some time. He was a colonel in the Air Force. At this point in his life, I believe he was retired. And one of the things that Colonel Stevens did, he was stationed up somewhere near the North Pole, I believe, maybe at the very tip of Alaska up there. And he was in charge of a group of B-29s that would fly out over the North Pole and then come back. And they were always seeing ships out there. And they would film the ships with these cameras, and they would send the films off to the Pentagon. And Colonel Stevens would never get to see the films. So he became an avid UFO researcher, and he took a great interest in the case there in Switzerland. And later he would bring Lee and Britt Elders, who had their own private investigation firms, to Switzerland, and they would test Billy's photographs and sound recordings. And Billy was even given a lie detector test, which he passed. It's very strange that most of the world looks at this case and does everything that they can possibly do to make it seem as if it's a hoax. And I think the Plejaren and Billy even allow this, or in some ways almost encourage it, because they've included some photographs which are very strange in terms of their perspective and whatnot. And I think this gives people an out. So no one's forced to take this case seriously. Because the information here is very profound and not everyone's ready for it. And I don't think it should be pushed on anyone. And we should take this all step by step. There's a lot of information here that we need that's very, very good for our life. And I have my guest. He'll be coming on in about a half an hour here. And I just want to send him a quick message on Skype. Hopefully he can see that. Yeah, I'm going to have a guest. Frosty Wooldridge has been coming on during the second hour. And he's very knowledgeable on overpopulation. And that's one of the biggest problems, according to the Meyer case, is overpopulation. I'm going to shift gears ever so slightly now and go into a little more depth on, and maybe I won't talk about this for the whole next half of an hour, but I also recommend that if you get a chance, listen to some of the films of Dr. Bruce Lipton, because he's done some interesting stem cell research. And through his stem cell research in biology, he found out that our thoughts affect our biology. And this is one of the things that the Meyer case has been telling us, is your thinking affects your blood chemistry. And if you read pages 200 to about 230 in The Might of Thoughts, it's going to tell you how to think, how to, we're told to be confident, to be optimistic, to be relaxed, to be cheerful, to be enthusiastic. The other thing that we're told about is harmony. And this is one of the creational natural laws. We should have harmony in our thinking. Billy explains it this way. He says that as a rule, suffering is an effect of some form of wrong thinking. And the incidents of suffering in the life are indicators that the law of harmony has been broken and disregarded. And if you go right around, I think it's page 362 in The Might of Thoughts, it says a few things about harmony. And I'll go ahead and read that. As a result of harmony, the consciousness and its thoughts, as well as the life and the work, flow in a stream, which is not only extremely pleasant for the human being, rather it is also progressive. Whereby, however, people can sink into negativism. And let me read this. They sink into negativism and they regard every hope, all optimism, every joy, and all harmony as purely superficial factors and as completely unrealistic. Don't have that kind of thinking. They see the world and everything contained within it, and indeed also human beings and their thinking and actions and so forth, only as terrible things and misery. However, truthfully, everything is not so negative and evil and depraved as the negative thinkers erroneously think. So don't allow yourself to be a negative thinker. It will affect your health in a very, very bad way. Tell yourself, I'm confident, I'm optimistic, I'm relaxed, I'm cheerful, I'm enthusiastic. And one of the things that Billy's teacher told him is to build up a great confidence. You must confront your obligations and build up a great confidence. And we need to have a true confidence in ourselves. and that we should acquire confidence. And by doing that, always maintain control. Well, I've got this little voice in my head that's telling me I better check in with my guest. And I'll see if he wants to stop in a little bit early, perhaps. He may not be ready for that. We can bring him back on later. See if he's ready. He may not be ready, which is perfectly legitimate. Frosty?
Yes, sir.
I'm early.
Sounds good.
Is that okay with you?
It's okay with me.
Okay, man. I sent you an email about half an hour ago, and I can't remember if I told you to be ready at 4 or to be ready at 5. Typically,
yeah, I got it. I just sent you back. I said I'm ready to go. I work on Saturdays, so.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Typically, I just give you the last hour, which would be 5 to 6, but I can't remember exactly what I told you. That's why I'm bringing you on early, because I saw you were there. So I thought, well, let's go for it.
Yeah, that sounds great, Mark. No problem at all.
Okay. So we'll talk for about a half an hour, and then you'll hear a bunch of music. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll have the normal last hour together. Okay. The way we normally do it. How are you doing, and where are you going to take us today? I know we're going to be talking about overpopulation and the immigrants. That's still in the news. I guess Trump has sent the military down there. Are you impressed?
Well, yeah. It just depends on how many in Congress and the judges stop him. One of the things I have just discovered, I live in Golden, Colorado, which is pretty high rent. And I also live even farther west by 5 miles in a place called Genesee, which is pretty well-to-do area. And so 10 years ago when I moved here, I went to the Golden City Council and I tried to get the Golden population stabilization policy passed, and I spent 12 months, altogether 12 months, actually 14 months with 3-minute speeches plus handouts, inviting them and trying to guide them to create a no-growth policy because, exponential growth, even at 0.5% or 1% per year, will end up, overpopulating any landmass. And they were like deer in the headlights. They didn't, and they couldn't understand it, even though they're all sitting in gridlock traffic and the brown cloud over Denver is a nightmare, and that 10,000 people move into Colorado every month from other overpopulated arenas, certainly there in the East Coast and on the West Coast and you name it. And so then here it is 10 years later, and I've redone that. And so there's a thing called, it's a newsletter here in the Genesee area, which is Golden. And I said I want to have 2 or 3 people to back me up as I go down to the city council and ask for this Golden population stabilization policy, because it would be the first in the country. And also it would be duplicated. And of course, there's more different city council members at this point, 10 years later. And I've already given 2 September, October 3-minute speeches plus the handouts and graphs showing what we're facing. And of course, I'm talking about gridlock traffic next month. I just talked about the water and how much trouble we are in as water and so forth. And I also talk about my next book, which is America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations, and that will publish in March. And honest to God, I asked in this one newsletter that I'm a part of here in the Genesee area, there's 6,000 people in this area spread out across western Golden. I got more people fighting me, telling me that it's not a problem. And there's only, out of the 20 that are fighting me, there's only about 3 or 4 that are supporting me. And it's just extraordinary. And so when when you look across the American landscape, we just don't understand what we're facing, and most Americans don't understand it. I mean, your listeners understand it more than anybody else because you and I have been speaking together all these years. And so it's really disconcerting that so many don't understand that immigration is the driving force that's going to add 100 million more people to this country. And they just don't get on board. They don't understand the long-term ramifications. So it's extraordinarily frustrating. And so that's why you're seeing that the E-Verify has not been passed in 20 years. Which would stop the job magnet, and then you're seeing that nobody's talking about getting immigration reduced, to nothing. Take a moratorium for the next 20 years, and so I don't know. I mean, do you see a disconnect between reality and the American population, and plus the leaders themselves?
Here's the way people look at it, and they think, okay, how much space is there in Texas, for example, and then they assign a certain amount of space to each person, which are 7 billion people, and they think in their mind, we can fit everybody into Texas and there's no problem.
Right.
Like last show I talked about, well, what if you give these, let's say we make them all Texans, right, and they're going to eat beef, right? Every Texan has to eat some beef. So we assign 1 cow per person. That's 7 billion cows. Well, if you've got 7 billion cows, 1 cow for each person, which they get to eat through their whole life, that's really conservative. And we can talk about why that's conservative. We eat a lot more than we think we do. Anyway, they say 2 acres per cow. So with 7 billion cows times 2 acres, that'll be 14 billion acres. 14 billion acres of land is needed to support just the beef that those 7 billion people would eat. And that's 14 billion acres. If you do the math, comes out to 21 million square miles. That's all the surface area in the United States, Canada, Russia, and South America. And I went over that, and we talked about that quickly last show, but maybe you could use an argument like that. Let me give you another example. If you have a 2,000 square foot house, okay, and you assign 10 square feet to each person, you can theoretically fit 200 people in your 2,000 square foot house. But everyone in their own mind could see how ridiculous that would be, because 2,000 square foot house is maybe average. I don't know. No one would try to put 200 people in their house, right? I mean, you'd have to take all the furniture out just to get them to fit together if they each get 10 square feet. It would ruin everything in your house, right?
Of course.
I think things like this is the way we need to reach people. For some reason, I think this is the way people have to be. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, they have to be educated and something that's relatable. And I've always said that, another 140 million people in the United States of America will double the size of our 35 most populated cities. And wow. I think I've said that on our show here together. New York City goes from 8.3 million to 16.6 million. Chicago from about 5 million, generally around Chicago, to 10 million, and 11 million in LA down to up to 22 million. The state of Florida is on course right now to jump from 18 million to 36 million, and then try to relate the fact that there's not enough water to sustain all this. But somehow the translation mark doesn't seem to hit the American people, because if it did, the coffee houses and the diners, everybody would be talking about the fact that we just can't sustain another 100 million immigrants.
No, they don't understand. They really don't understand.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah.
And I think that's what well, let me give you another. This will help people understand that might be listening to the show.
Oh, and just before I forget.
Yeah.
What people don't, and you just gave me the 1 cow. Well, it takes 16 grains. It takes 16 pounds of grain to put 1 pound of beef on a cow, and it takes 2,500 gallons of water to put a pound of beef on a cow.
Oh my goodness! I had no idea.
That's a fact. It's in my coming book.
Oh,
2,500 gallons of water must be drank by a cow, and 16 pounds of grain must be consumed to put 1 pound on a cow.
My goodness, I had no idea.
Oh yeah, take your breath away, huh?
Those are great statistics.
Oh, I know.
I'll have to put that in my notes. That was 16 pounds of grain.
That's right, 16 pounds of grain. Now think about how much water it takes to grow 16 pounds of grain, and then you got to transport that grain to the feed fields. How much gasoline does that take to do that, to grow the grain, cultivate the grain, and then harvest the grain, and then transport the grain just to get it to the cow? And then you got to feed that cow 2,500 gallons for every pound that the cow gains while eating the 16 pounds of grain. You can see where everything just completely can't continue in this particular, tract.
That's hilarious. Are you sure it's that high? 2,500 gallons?
2,500 gallons it takes for every pound added to a cow. And the average cow shits about, I think it's 54 pounds a day.
No, you got to be kidding me.
Oh no, I'm not kidding you. The amount of cow shit that's out there is absolutely astronomical.
You know, there's no way.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that we could feed everyone beef.
Right.
It's just absolutely impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
that's why there's so much pollution from the meat consumption in this country. I mean, it just can't be sustained. It's just that bad.
Now, are you a vegan?
We kill off 24 million chickens every day just to feed
24
million and about 150,000 cows. 150,000 cows every day, and 24/7 to feed the human population here in America at 330 million.
So 24 million chickens per day?
Per day, that's right.
And how many cows?
About 140, almost 150,000.
Wow.
I'll tell you what, I've got so much stuff swimming around in my head, it's amazing I can keep my sanity.
Well, I think that's how you can reach people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's through these statistics, because you know, if you eat, I don't know, if someone would say live 100 years and eat 5 pounds of meat per year, they would only consume a single cow in their lifetime, because I think there's 500 pounds of beef per cow once you get rid of the bones and everything. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that consistent with your statistics, what you've heard?
That's pretty reasonable.
Okay. So it's very possible that someone might eat 2 pounds of beef per week. So.
Oh yeah, very much so.
You know,
if you talk about the chicken that they eat, you talk about the fish that they eat, you talk about the pork that they consume, and then you start looking at the dairy product, the cheese and the milk and the butter. It just adds up extraordinarily.
Yeah, I did the math, and I probably would eat 10 cows or something in my lifetime. You know,
of course, I don't eat any cows.
You don't eat any beef. Are you a vegan?
Yeah, I've been a vegan for 47 years.
So do you eat eggs?
No, a total vegan, plant-based diet, totally.
Totally. So you don't get
no animal protein.
No animal protein. You feel just fine?
Yeah, I'm 6'2", weigh 188 pounds. I'm healthier than most 30-year-olds.
My goodness! Wow.
I do 100 sit-ups every day. I swim a half mile. In fact, this morning I spent 2 hours at the gym. I spend 2 hours 6 days a week at the gym. I do a half-mile swim. I do a stretching meditation and prayer in the hot tub for 20 minutes. And then I do 45 minutes of lifting weights. I run a mile on the elliptical, and I bicycle for 25. So I really, an hour later, I walk out refreshed and ready to work. And And the key is and then of course I eat vegan. In fact, I just had the carrot soup, and I just had a salad that Sandy just made up for lunch. And that's why I stay lean and clean. And I'm able to bicycle across the continent. I'm able to mountaineer ski up to 13,000 feet in the middle of the winter. I just Friday, Saturday, Sunday of this last week, I bicycled, 30 miles, 20 and 30 miles a day.
That's a lot.
So yeah, I'm at my age, I'm almost 72, and I still play like a kid.
Goodness sakes.
Yeah.
I always had the feeling that maybe the vegan diet would, I wouldn't have a lot of energy.
Oh, you have tons of energy.
No kidding.
Wow. The reason for that is what happens, and I'll give you an example. Most people that eat the standard American diet, high beef consumption, well, actually, in America, we receive 29% protein. You only need 8 to 10% protein, and that's why Americans have so much problem with their calcium is pulled out of their bones to deal with the protein, and that's why they have problems with calcium and their bone problems. And of course, they keep getting, when you're born, you have Rocky Mountain whitewater, which is clean and clear and highly efficient. And it's racing around the system, and it's feeding the system, the blood. But as you get older and you keep eating beef and pork, and it's called cell aggregation. The red blood cells clump together, and they then turn into what is called Mississippi River sludge, deoxygenated, slow-moving, dirty, contaminated, and it simply doesn't feed the body. So everybody's so worn out, or they're tired, or they're fatigued. That's why they got to drink more coffee, or they'll drink a Mountain Dew, and they drink soda pop, which is even worse, because that dumps in, 17 teaspoons of sugar per bottle of Mountain Dew or Coke or Pepsi. But the caffeine zips them up. Whereas somebody like me, who has a high Rocky Mountain whitewater blood, I've got tons of energy because my blood is flying around the system, feeding the oxygen. My VO2 max is as high as a bicycle racer, which means it's highly efficient. So I get all the energy I want. So that's why people sit there and they are amazed that at 72 years of age, I've got more energy than most people that are 30 years old. It's because my blood is Rocky Mountain whitewater efficiency.
Well, you said something that really piqued my interest. That pulling is the protein in our diet pulling calcium out of our bones?
Yeah, it actually, your body has to pull calcium out of the bones to deal with the over-proteinization of your body. And so we're finding that a lot of people that they get really fragile bones as they get older. It's just because they've been eating too much protein. This country is over-proteinized. Oh my God, we ate way too much protein in this country.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
very, very.
Well, I'll give you another one. Eating to elimination. You need 40 grams of fiber every day to have a highly efficient colon and keep it clean, so that you don't have hemorrhoids, and so you don't have diverticulitis, colonitis, and any of the other aspects of rectal cancer, colorectal cancer. And so the average American has between 15 and 20 grams of fiber every day. That's why from eating to elimination is usually 72 to 90 hours. And so that's why Americans have so much hemorrhoid consequences, and they have diverticulitis, colonitis, because they're not moving the food through their system. And so how do you know if you get 40 grams of fiber? Well, if you get 40 grams of fiber, you'll have 2 bowel movements every day, and the bowel movements will take no more than 3 to 5 seconds. But you notice most people are sitting on a pot for 5 to 10 minutes.
Sure.
It's because they just can't move. They can't move the bowel. They can't move the fecal matter through the system because it's jammed up in the rectal area and into the intestinal tract. But if you're doing 40 grams a day, I guarantee you, in the morning I wake up, boom, 3 seconds, I'm on that pot and I'm off the pot, and then my rectal area fills up again within the next 10 to 20 minutes, and then I'm back on the pot and boom, it's out in 5 seconds, and then I'm on my way for the rest of the day. Whereas most people are sitting there groaning, grunting, and my fecal matter moves through in 24 hours, whereas most people in America, 72 to 90 hours before the fecal matter even gets out of their systems. And of course, they're all stressing and straining with the horrible, lack of fiber. And so their bowel movements are very, very hard to move through the anal sphincters.
My dad had diverticulitis.
Yeah, that's exactly why.
So that's mostly from not enough fiber.
That's exactly correct. That's 100% correct. In fact, my wife Sandy's sister is not a very sharp cookie, and she's married to a guy that's not a very sharp cookie. He just turned 50, and just last week he's in the hospital with diverticulitis, and so now they want to know from Uncle Frosty, who's the health nut, of what to do to how to heal up his diverticulitis instead of using all the chemicals and all the the drugs that the doctors want to give them. So I've given them a protocol to do that.
Well, the doctors, they'll just attack it with drugs, right?
Oh yeah, they won't tell you to start eating prune juice. Drink glass of prune juice in the morning and a glass of prune juice at night, and eat 10, 20 prunes. That'll give you all the fiber you need, but you need to be eating pears are incredible, peaches are incredible, apples are oranges, anything and everything. All the vegetables have all the fiber that'll move through the system, but most people they won't do it. They rather have potato chips than they rather have cheese, which will glom you up. They rather have Doritos. You just be amazed at how Americans eat horribly. It's just unbelievable what Americans eat, and they don't understand what they're doing to themselves.
Wow, this is pretty amazing. So too much meat, not only is it unsustainable, I mean, just by the numbers we've done, we're just really destroying our health.
That's exactly right. If I can really, this is documented. If the American people would go vegetarian and even vegan, which is better, because vegetarian, they're still drinking milk, and they're still eating cheese, and they're still eating butter, and they're still eating all the fats, ice cream, and so forth, and yogurt. If the American people went vegan, and I did it for health reasons way back in 1971, because I was a cardiac catheterization med tech after I got out of the Army, and I was a medical service corps officer when I was in the Army. I was a lieutenant, within 30 days, I became a cardiac med tech, and that's an operation that shows you how bad your class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4 coronary artery disease is, and how far it's advanced. And I could see the writing on the wall, because my dad died of a heart attack at 46. And I asked the doc, my God, I'm going to die at 46. And he said, well, no, you inherit a good heart. What you inherit are the eating patterns of your parents. Well, my dad was a German, and my mom was a Swede, and he loved gristle and fats and cheese and the whole nine, bratwurst and so forth. So within 30, he died at 46. So within 30 days, I went full vegan. And they said, well, that's a weirdo vegan, and what the doc said, don't eat anything with a face on it, and avoid dairy products, and because dairy products are just really bad for you, and lactose intolerance and and it's cow milk, and it doesn't have the same molecular aspect as human milk. And so anyway, I did, and here I am, nearly 72 years of age, and I've already had one brother die at 50, and another one had a stroke at 55, because they never listened to me. And one paid with his life, and the other had paid with a stroke, and he's not doing so well. And here I am. I can go do anything I want, because my arteries are clear. My heart's just happy as heck. And my body is lean and clean and highly efficient. And so, it does make a difference. And I would dare say that if the American people went vegan, 90% of all of our health issues would vanish. And that you wouldn't need the unbelievable, it shouldn't be called health care for the American people. It should be called sick care, because of a sick American diet.
Just to give you a little warning, I think in 5 minutes, hopefully we'll get a break. I'm hoping, usually the music will kick on in 5 minutes. Have you ever paid any attention to the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton?
I've heard the name, but I'm not sure.
You should check into him. He's done a lot of Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's done a lot of research. Lipton, like Lipton tea, I guess,
Yeah.
Lipton. So
Sure.
he's done a lot of research on stem cells, and this is kind of going off on a slight tangent.
Yeah.
But what he found was that stem cells, they will grow differently based on the medium that you put them in. So he could put stem cells in a certain kind of medium, it would grow fat, certain kind of medium would grow muscle, certain kind of medium, the stem cells would grow bones. But he also found that our thinking affects our blood chemistry. And I know this is kind of off of the topic of diet, and I want to go back to the diet thing, but how we look at things, how we think of things affects our blood chemistry and then our health.
That's true. Actually, if you want, her name is Sheldon. Her name is Sheldon, and How to Change Your Frequency to Change Your Reality. You can go on YouTube, and her name is Sheldon, Sheldon.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you change I call it high vibrational frequency living. In my book that was published in May of a year ago, Living Your Spectacular Life, I talk about high vibrational frequency living. And even though I talk about very serious stuff on your show and all that I write about, I live high vibrational frequency living. In other words, I'm a happy guy, and I look at the positive side of life. I play a lot. I work hard, and I work with passion and curiosity. But I also work with this high vibrational frequency living, and I'm always looking to the good side. I always figure I'm going to win. I always figure I'm going to succeed. I always figure that I'm going to enjoy myself. And so if this gal's name, again, How to Change Your Frequency to Change Your Life. And her last name is Shelton, Sheldon.
Okay.
Sheldon.
I have to look
And
her
I'll
up.
tell you, it's pretty amazing. And it's a half-hour lecture, and she shows you the 6 ways of doing it. And I pretty much do that.
To the deep recesses of the soul matrix, she holds a wealth of knowledge on herbs, plants, and astrology. Join Mona and her guests on adventures of a feral hippie as she touches the earthly radio waves 5 days a week at 2 p.m. Monday to Friday.
I think we're on break.
Evolution Radio.
Transcending the time and space, let us take you place inside my thoughts, vibe, and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Who are we? Where do we come from? Are you curious about the origins of the human race? Join me, Gavin McCall, and a variety of guests on Ancient Humans, where we decipher world events, explore scientific theories, personal stories, myths, mysteries, and lore about the history of the human race.
Hi everybody, it's me, The Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing, and informative guests. And you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. My guest this evening is Frosty Wooldridge, and we're off on a tangent. We're talking a little bit about diet, and we were talking about food earlier, particularly as it relates to population. And we got off on an interesting side tangent here, talking about food and how certain food affects your mind and how your thoughts affect your health. And Frosty, do you have to combine things like beans and rice to get your complete proteins?
Yes, Mark, that's true. I do a lot of legumes and rice. Virtually, I'm what you'd call a grazer. I don't eat big, huge meals. Mm-hmm. I graze throughout the day. And the key for me, and it's in my latest book, Living Your Spectacular Life. You can get that on Amazon in softcover. It's a 400-page book. Really? And it's very entertaining reading because it really actually expresses in what I call high vibrational frequency living. In other words, if you're excited about something, you can't wait to get to the next game, or you can't wait to go skiing, or you can't wait to go hunting, or you can't wait to go do something that entertains you, that you love. Could be riding a bicycle. Mm-hmm. Some people love to do Ragbri across Iowa. Some people like in Michigan like to do the big ride up from Lansing all the way to the Mackinac Bridge, which of course I've done myself. I'm an old Michigan boy, and so that excitement is high vibrational frequency. Thinking, living, acting. It's energy that pulses through your body in a very positive manner. Whereas if you have low vibrational frequency living, you may be in a very poor job. You may be poor. You didn't get enough education, so you can't follow your dreams, or you don't even have any dreams. And one thing my book does, Living Your Spectacular Life, is how to get to that purpose, that curiosity, that passion that drives every day for you, and it creates that high vibrational frequency living. If you notice a lot of people, Mark, that are depressed in their lives, that they're down and out, a lot of them, they're smoking cigarettes because they're getting stimulated by the nicotine, or they drink and they get dulled by the alcohol, or they get stoned, so they simply become blasé. Or they're so depressed that their not the melatonin, but the serotonin drops in their body and their mind, so that they have low vibrational frequency, and so they almost have meaningless lives or non-directed lives. And so for me, the key is, if you want to have a fabulous life, and again, I'm just a Michigan farm boy. I mean, I came from a very poor Michigan farm. Parents were poor, lived a very meager life, and yet my dad always said, and my mom always directed, education, read, do well in school, find your purpose. And so because of that, I was driven to read a lot and to learn a lot and then to explore a lot. And so And my brothers and sisters are the same way. They had this high vibrational frequency living to become persons who are contributing to life by contributing to our own well-being, body, mind, and spirit. In fact, my book talks about it: body, mind, spirit, job, and relationships. If you've got all those 5 things together, then you are on your way to living a high vibrational frequency life, which means a happy, fulfilled, sustained curiosity, sustained love of living, a love of yourself. And there's actually consciousness energy degrees that show you why some people say if they're apathetic, they have a rating of 50 on the consciousness level. Whereas if you're a loving person, you give out energy, it puts you up around 500. And when you get up to around 700, you're like the Dalai Lama, who is, he loves everybody, he makes no judgments. And again, you never compare yourself. The key is always accept your looks, your body, your mind, and all that is you, because it's the only thing that you've got in this universe for the 70 or 80 years you're living on this planet. And so one of the things, and I remember this back in high school, I had fellow students would say, well, Frosty, you're so overconfident. Well, you're conceited. You think you're a know-it-all. Well, because I studied so hard every night, I usually did know the lesson, so I could answer the questions in class, and I certainly did well on the tests. But I studied my fanny off. My dad always said, remain confident in yourself, because if you're not confident in yourself, who is going to be confident in you? And do you want to be somebody that goes around afraid of your shadow, or you're not confident? And that's is being not confident or not cocky or not self-assured. Is that a good way to go through life? And of course, for me, it wasn't a good way to go through life. I'd rather be somebody who was confident, self-assured, and motivated, rather than somebody who's insecure or they feel that they're not good enough. And I'm sure a lot of women listening, I know women have heard this, or they've felt that, is I'm not good enough. Well, you are good enough. You're a human being. You have the ability and the perfection of your existence to propel you into life. And I would really suggest to anybody, her name is Sheldon, and I forget her first name, but go to YouTube, and it's How to Change Your Frequency to Change Your Reality. Go to YouTube and just get that title by Sheldon, Sheldon. As a matter of fact, I just listened to her 30-minute, and she goes over the 5 aspects about, how to change your frequency. And she says, be extraordinary in your thought and deed. And then number 2, she says, be grateful and thankful. Move toward love and above with your intentions. Make your intentions your lead. And again, intentions are not hope and a wish or faith. Intentions are put into the universe, and the universe actually can work on intentions, where if you hope about something, or your faith about something, or you think it's going to happen, no. You got to take the intentions, because the universe will help you with the intentions, and then you go into action mode. And the action mode is what you do is to move toward your intentions. And then you start thinking about expansive thinking. You want to think beyond your limitations. I'm sitting here, and I talked to you many times on the seriousness of what's happening to America, as to overpopulation, to mass immigration, to the sociological, cultural destruction of our culture and our ethos because of mass, immigration into the country. And at the same time, I think I can help change that. I think I'm a factor in changing the way Americans think about this, so that we can literally save our civilization and become a very productive and enlightened, and certainly, society that's moving toward a successful, thriving future for our children. Obviously, as you all look at the news today, that is probably a difficult task, and yet I'm so confident because of what my mother and father implanted into me. And in fact, what this Sheldon lady can actually help you delete the old scripts, if you will. If you feel insecure or you feel not enough, you're not good enough, or you feel that you don't have the brains or the ability or the whatever, you can erase those parent scripts. They're called parent scripts. They were given to you by your parents. If you have money problems, if you have job unhappiness, if you have relationship challenges, then you can literally move away from them by re-scripting your brain, by choosing love and understanding and patience and curiosity and confidence in yourself. And then as you do that, you then create high vibrational frequency living, and then you attract more in that realm, and then you leave the old realm and you leave those people of the old realm. In other words, if you stick around a bunch of drunks at a bar and you talk nothing but bar talk, you will be in the bar for the rest of your life talking about pretty much nothing of importance with people that are not going anywhere. Whereas if you go to a racquetball court, or you go skiing on a ski lift, or you go into a triathlon, or you go into tennis, or you go into running, or you go into some high activity where people that are very stimulating and stimulated and certainly intelligent, you then start to get into the realm of high vibrational frequency living with people who have chosen the same path. And then you also will then become highly enlightened along with them, and you'll see your life just turn into extraordinary expansion. Does that make sense?
You know, it's just so interesting sitting here listening to you, because the first hour of my show, I focus on the writings of a man in Switzerland. His name is Billy Meyer, and he talks about exactly the same stuff you've just been discussing.
Why?
Oh, it's just really bizarre. I'll read a little bit just from one of his books here. Becoming an optimist depends on the kind of the philosophy of life one has, and with that, on the following, those what he calls creational natural laws and recommendations, which determine the striving for that which is higher. And the other thing he talks about just the things you're talking about: confidence, optimism, being relaxed, being cheerful, being enthusiastic. And he also talks about the importance of striving. And you sound like an incredibly hard worker. But it's just very interesting that I have you on the show to talk about overpopulation. But we have this other perspective in common, is what I'll say. Still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, and I understand that. And even with the seriousness of what we're talking about, and certainly I've talked very seriously on this program with you for the last number of years, again, how we look at the present and understand the present as it is, as realistic, rather than depressed or defeated, mm-hmm. or all the things that go with that kind of thinking. The key for me is you have got to figure that you've already won the game before the game even started. It's like me climbing a mountain. I know I'm going to get to the top if I put one foot in front of the other. I think at some point there's going to be enough people that think and understand what I think and understand, because there's more like me. I mean, I hang with some of the sharpest minds in the country on this issue of immigration and mm-hmm. population and environment. Mm-hmm. I worked in South America with some of the finest scientific minds in the world. I work with some of the finest minds in this country. Whether it's Joanne Weidman, who was formerly the capsweb.org director, or certainly Roy Beck there at numbersusa.org, or Ann Manatas, who also works at numbersusa.org. Certainly Bob Dane at FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform. Of course, Dr. Jan Tanton and Mary Lou Tanton, some of the most brilliant minds. I've worked with Paul Ehrlich. I've shaken his hand. I've been to conferences to see him. The guy is brilliant. He will be shown to be one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th and 21st century with his whole understanding of human overpopulation. And so the key is, at some point, and I think it was, I can't remember, William Caton, Caton, C-A-T-T-O-N. And then he talks about how complex societies either succeed or fail. And even Jared Diamond, the guy who wrote Collapse, how societies choose to succeed or fail. I'm hoping that we have enough people that are enough educated at some point in time here in the next 5 to 10 years to create an entire swing in this country toward a responsible actions toward the future and for our children, rather than the way we're going right now, because the way we're going right now is literally driving us over a demographic cliff. And, and I'm old enough to understand all that. And yet I'm still young enough to know that I've got at least 10 more years where I can make some effect and actually create that wave of change that leads to a positive future for our civilization.
I really like the way you say that too, that could lead to a change, because that's what we're hoping to do here. We're hoping to impact enough people that they could start to change their mind and look at things differently. You know what? Do you agree that if we don't change our ways,
right,
our society could collapse?
Very, very definitely. I can tell you this, in the scientific terms, it's called exponential growth, the exponential growth factor. And that was first brought up by a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Albert Bartlett. And you can go to albertbartlett.org and watch his 1 hour program on growth and immigration. And it's his commensurate understanding of a petri dish. You can only overload a petri dish. It's at some point the whole the whole living organism of the petri dish finally collapses because it eats itself out of house and home.
Wow.
And it's very scientific. And we, of course, in the United States of America, and simply the whole human race right now, which has 7.6 billion of us, we're eating ourselves out of house and home. We're destroying the oceans. In fact, I'm going to do a thing on Monday. For those of you who read me on newswithviews.com or capitolhilloutsider.com, I'm going to write a piece on, it's called 4ocean.com. It's just the number 4, OCEAN, 4ocean.com. Two surfers, I think they were in Florida or California, saw so much trash on the bottom of the ocean. Now, you have to understand, I started scuba diving back in 1963. That was before plastics. And I can tell you the oceans were absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. I have literally on the Great on the Great Barrier Reef, I have scuba dived. I've scuba dived in California, in South America, on the Galapagos Islands. I've been in the Pacific. I've been in the Mediterranean. I've been in the Indian Ocean and scuba dived. I've scuba dived in the Great Lakes. You name it, I've been there. In the last 50 years, I've watched plastic just take over. There's more plastic plumes than there are jellyfish, for God's sakes. There's more plastic bags than there are jellyfish. In fact, there are 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic in the oceans above the waves and below the waves right now. In fact, the average is 46 pieces of plastic are floating on every square mile of our oceans. That's supported and documented by Julia Whitty of One Earth magazine and a big study she did. And that's corroborated by a few others. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is over 100 million tons of plastic floating 30 to 90 feet deep, the size of Texas, about 1,000 miles off of San Francisco. Well, guess what? I've seen all this, folks. And as a matter of fact, so if you want to, go to 4ocean.com. You can actually buy a bracelet, and every time you buy a bracelet, you help all of these scuba divers lift a pound of trash and plastic and tires and steel and trays and junk off the bottom of the ocean. And in fact, since January, they've picked up 872,000 pounds of trash on the bottom of the ocean off the shorelines of 27 countries. And as a matter of fact, I'm still a registered scuba diver with SSI. And this winter, I'm going to volunteer my scuba diving abilities along with two of my buddies and my wife. And we're going to go down to probably the Gulf of Mexico and get on some diving rigs and go volunteer 2 weeks to pick up all this plastic. And so if you want, you can actually get a nice, beautiful bracelet by going to the number 4, just www.4ocean.com, and put some money into it. I mean, buy $10 or $5 or $10 worth of bracelets, and that way you're going to be helping picking up the oceans. And if those of you who want to see the rivers picked up, this guy named Chad Prague Reiki has been picking up the Mississippi River for over 15 years now. And you can go to livinglandsandwaters.org, livinglandsandwaters.org, and put your money where your mouth is, because he's got 6,000 volunteers now. He's cleaned up a major part of the Mississippi River, 2,552 miles. And why do I know? Because I canoed the doggone thing. And it's just full of trash. Well, he, for the last 15 years, has been picking it all up. He's picked up 90,000 bags of trash. 90,000 bags. I think 10,000 chairs, 1,000 cable. I think it's 10,000 yards of cable. He's picked up over 50 cars out of the Mississippi River, 50-something tractors.
How does he get the cars out? How does he get the cars out of there?
He now has money being donated, and I actually did an article on him about 6 years ago, and I sent it off to Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and asked them for $10 million. He didn't get it, but he's gotten millions of other dollars from people who care, because he's trying to, if you care about the rivers of America, whether it's the Columbia River, or whether it's the Mississippi or the Arkansas or the Hudson or any of the rivers coming out of America, send some money or become a volunteer. They'll put you to work. And my goal was, and I'm going to go back after the Gates Foundation and ask for $10 million, because what's $10 million out of his $60 billion?
Probably nothing.
It's nothing. So help him help everybody else to get organized and pick up all of these rivers. The Hudson, there's rivers in all over Maine, coming out of New Hampshire, coming out of Arizona. The Colorado River is a mess. And let's save these rivers by picking up all of the trash and stopping all of the pollution going into those rivers. So there's another place you can do something. But yeah, and if you're a scuba diver, join me. Again, the number 4, ocean.com. Put some money down there and help them out. I'm actually writing a big column on that on Monday, because I want to see this trash picked up, because unfortunately the world population puts about 16 billion pounds of plastics into the ocean every year now, and that's just disgusting. We need deposit return laws of about 25 cents on every piece of plastic to stop this kind of just unbelievable desecration of our planet.
So how do plastics end up in the rivers and the oceans?
Well, it's because people just literally, if you start looking at, there's 330 million Americans, and even if it's only 20 or 30%, which is what it is, that are throwing their plastics out. And any one of you, if you go to a truck stop, you go to a rest area, you go alongside the roads, you go to the rivers, you go to the lakes, guess what? You see plastic containers tossed in everywhere, on the lawn, in the water, in the rivers. I mean, I've been picking up I don't know if you know, I don't know if I ever said this, but I have picked up over 1 million pieces of trash on 6 continents in my lifetime. That's in the last 55 years. I've picked up at least 1 million pieces of trash, because I go on river pickups, I organize pickups, I've been on lake pickups, I've been on scuba diving trips to pick up. And of course, there's millions and literally billions of people who toss their trash. And if you go to India, the Ganges is giant plastic. In fact, the Taj Mahal, which is so famous in India, the river right next to it is a knee deep in plastic. I mean, knee deep.
The
Ganges is a horribly polluted and plastic conveyor belt, and so is the Yangtze River, which I've also floated on. I've also in Lima, Peru, the river coming out of the Lima, Peru, it's got nothing but plastic floating out into the ocean. So the same thing in Sao Paulo, where I've been, in Brazil, and certainly Rio de Janeiro. Those rivers are just running in feces and plastic and all sorts of industrial waste and chemicals. So, yeah, it's a mess. It's a total mess, Mark.
So when we put our plastics into the garbage and the truck comes and takes our garbage away, that goes into the dump. That's not the plastic you're talking about, right?
No, it's the plastic that doesn't get into the garbage. It's the plastic that gets tossed into the rivers and the lakes and the streams. Notice all the plastic bags that are hanging from fence posts and trees and tree limbs and gates and everything else down the highways. That's the 20 to 30% of Americans who really don't care.
Jeez.
They just don't care. I can tell you this. If you go into third world countries, they're used to just throwing all of their debris, because before plastics, it was all biodegradable. But now that you've given all these plastics to all these third world people who have a high degree of illiteracy rates, like 95% illiterate, which is most of Africa. I mean, people that don't have any kind of education. Mexico, they use paint into the rivers and into the lakes. They just don't have an awareness. They're not educated enough to see the consequences. And so the same thing in Central and South America, the same thing in Indonesia. That's the one thing about me having traveled all over the planet. I have no illusions about what human beings can do to desecrate the planet. And so that's what we're facing. And so that's why I support an international 25-cent deposit on every kind of plastic and aluminum and tin and glass, to get it back into the system rather than to throw it out into nature.
So people throwing out plastic are just being irresponsible. That's how the plastic gets into the ocean. That ocean plastic is just people who have littered, who have thrown things out. Is that
correct? And that's 3.5 million pieces of plastic every 24 hours. And that's 24/7. That's how much plastic is being tossed into the ocean.
Oh, my. Have you ever done any research on what's happening at our garbage dumps? Because we're just, that stuff is just piling up at these gigantic dumps, right?
That's right. Well, you have to understand, take 330 million people. And this is coming out in my third book on overpopulation here in America. Many of you have read Immigration's Unarmed Invasion, Deadly Consequences, that came out 15 years ago. And since that time, we've had 40 million people in the United States. 40 million. That's what we've added to America, most of it by immigration. And then the second one came out 6 years ago. It's called America on the Brink. The next added 100 million Americans. And of course, that's the one that's dealing with the fact that we're about to add 100 million. And of course, the next one is called America's Overpopulation Predicament, Blindsiding Future Generations. That's why I know all these facts and figures. They're all supported and documented. And so our country is a little bit more responsible, but not much more responsible, because we're generating so much plastic. Now, they're actually starting to use plastic to build road beds instead of asphalt and tar. And so that could be a whole new use for plastic. But if you look across America right now, only 30% of Americans recycle, and 70% toss all of their glass, tin, metal, aluminum, and plastic into the trash. And it's take 330 million people times 4 pounds of plastic per day, 4 pounds of trash per day. So take 330 million times 4 pounds, and what do you get? that's how much debris, that's how much garbage that we're tossing into these landfills 24/7. Again, take your calculators out. I'm talking 330 million Americans. We are the most waste-producing country in the world. There's nobody close to us right now except for China. And take 330 million times 4 pounds, and that's what we're discarding every 24 hours into the landfills and onto the land and into the water and into the oceans in America.
Do you know, has anyone done any research on what happens at these landfills? I mean, they become like mountains after a while.
Oh, yeah. Some of them, they've actually created ski hills on them in the Midwest. It's true. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We out here in Denver, Colorado, and most of you know I'm a Michigan boy, so I certainly have all the Midwestern flavor of my whole life. But we've got out here in Denver right now, I would say 300, over 300, maybe 400-foot mountains loaded with trash out by DIA, the Denver International Airport. You can see the monster trash dumps out there. And, of course, they line them with plastic and all that goes with that, but there's so many chemicals. I mean, they've got, Weed Be Gone, you got Roundup, you got all these plastic cans, you got paint, you got chemical, you got 70,000 chemicals. I mean, you notice any garage in America and you've got at least 30, 40 different cans of unbelievable chemicals, whether it's herbicides, pesticides, paint thinner, you've got waxes, you've got bug spray. I mean, go into any garage in America and it's just a giant chemical dump. Those all go to the dump.
It's interesting. I wonder about ancient societies.
Mm-hmm.
We don't seem to see a big footprint of their garbage, do we?
No, we don't, because everything they had was biodegradable. The only thing that wasn't biodegradable, and the only thing that we see from ancient societies, is the stone buildings, such as the Parthenon or the Pantheon. Certainly down there in the Incas with the Machu Picchu, with all of the wells and all of the rocks and all of the boulders they put together. The Aztecs in Mexico and Central America, the Mayans. All that, the only debris left is the stone buildings, the pyramids. The same way over in Egypt. Nothing that would harm the environment. But now, essentially since 1945 to 50, when we started doing all the metal dumping and then the nuclear waste dumping and then all the oil dumping, I mean, the oceans have been taking unbelievable amount of oil dumping and then radiated. Fukushima has been uncounted millions, if not billions, of gallons of radiated liquid. You now have all of the nuclear waste. It's in barrels, stuck underground and so forth. At some point, those things will rupture as they get crushed. But yeah, since 1950, instead of just metal and or stone or something that's totally neutral against the environment, we now have all of this damage from all of these inventions called chemicals, 70,000 chemicals. And now the nuclear waste and certainly the chemical waste, the mustard gas. If you go on your Google, look up mustard gas from World War II, and it got dumped all over the West Coast. It got dumped all over the Gulf of Mexico. They even showed dumping spots off the East Coast. And then you can imagine India dumping all of its chemicals, and then Russia, with no environmental concern from 1950 right on, they've been dumping all their chemicals. And of course, anybody go to Rio de Janeiro, what does it say on the beaches? And why are the beaches brown from 20 miles on either side of Rio de Janeiro? Well, the reason is because they dump their raw sewage right into the ocean, and it says Peligro. And how do I know? Because I was there. How do I know? The same thing over in China on the Yangtze River. It's got a 20,000 square mile dead zone, where no vertebrate marine life can exist because it's so much chemicals. The same thing there in the Indian Ocean, and also on the Ganges, which is the same thing. It's just a 20,000 square mile dead zone. It's because so many chemicals and industrial waste are just shot out into the ocean as the final toilet. And that's all circulating around the planet. That's why all of the marine life and everything you eat out of the oceans today has some degree of contamination in it.
You know, my personal opinion is I kind of stopped eating all fish and things like that, particularly from the ocean.
Yeah.
It just seemed logical to me. It had to be polluted.
That's a very good choice, because everything has radiation in it, and it has some kind of chemical in it. Again, look up all those mustard gas, and there was also lucite. There was another gas, lucite, and all the dumps are marked right off the west coast, the east coast of America. You could probably Google all of the other dumps around Russia and China, certainly around Japan. Japan's been dumping. India dumps like crazy. I mean, you name it, these countries are dumping all their waste.
So I wonder, will our legacy then be garbage in giant landfills?
Pretty much.
I hope not.
Well, it'll be amazing if there are any kind of reasonably intelligent human beings left in another 100 years from now, and if we don't go back to a simpler form of life, and a sustainable form of life, these civilizations will be known as the civilizations of manufactured junk.
So our society will collapse if we continue on the path we're on. It's
yeah.
No doubt.
The exponential growth factor ultimately leads to collapse, and that's exactly correct.
So do we need a world government to start working together on solving these problems?
Unfortunately, a world government won't, from my experience, be able to do what each country can do for itself. So in the end, it's like, you sit here and you think, we got to solve all the suicides in this country. There's 44,000 suicides a year. In fact, it's about 44,900 suicides in this country every year. 18 teenagers kill themselves every day in this country. Can you solve that by having a suicide prevention at the federal level? And of course, the answer is no, you can't. You've got to really get to the local level, and you've got to get to the family level, and you've got to get to identification of each member of the family is important and is cared for and is part of the process of enculturation and given loving care and identity, so that child grows up to be a flourishing, contributing member. So that starts at the local level, which is the family level, which is the mother and father. So the same thing goes with how we're dealing, with pollution, how we're dealing with, communities, and it's always local. So I have no trust in a global government. I have no trust whatsoever in bureaucracies. It's like the UN, the United Nations. Has that been effective in stopping wars? And of course, the answer is absolutely not. In the end, it's got to be the citizens of each country. It's got to be the citizens at the local level that say, hey, enough of this, and let's stop this, and let's not have war. And that's the key. And so let's not have suicides. Let's not have all this ill health in this country. As a matter of fact, Boulder, Colorado is the first city in America that banned a Roundup and weed be gone and all these other herbicides. And I'm trying to get my city of Golden, Colorado, to ban all of these herbicides and pesticides that are just killing the bees. The bee colony collapse that's going on worldwide right now. That's all because of the chemicals that we're spraying on all these plants that are poisoning us, and that's why we've got to stop them from doing it. We got to stop Monsanto and Bayer from doing all the damage they're doing, and that comes from the local level.
It's interesting that you mentioned Roundup, because I've had to talk to like my neighbors behind me, and it's interesting that they just have no awareness. It's like, you spray this stuff and it's killing all these plants, and then everything turns brown. And then, the stuff's got to be seeping into the water, and it's why do people not see the danger of that? Why is living with a few weeds such a big deal? You know what I'm saying? I just don't get it.
Well, I have almost an acre of land behind my house here, and I have an 80-acre farm in Michigan that's been in the family for 70 years. Mm-hmm. And I do not tolerate any kind of chemicals on the 80-acre farm up there south of Cadillac on 131. And if anybody's listening and wants to go up there, it's actually a part of Airbnb. You can rent the farm, and I've got hiking trails, and I've got cross-country ski trails, and it's a beautiful place to be. And it is completely pristine. And the same thing with the acre behind my house here in Colorado. I just picked over 400 thistle weeds, the purple thistle weeds. I forget what you call them. Mm-hmm. Instead of roundupping, because my community wants to round them up, with a Roundup, and I just went out, and my wife and I, we pulled the roots, and you have to do it right after a rain, but you got to pull the roots on over 400 of them, and so we've done that for the last 2 years, and now we've pretty much eradicated those thistles, which are invasive weeds, from our property without using any chemicals. Why? It's because we have a little stream that runs through our property, and I don't want to poison that stream. Yeah. So everybody can pick weeds. You can pick them right out of the sidewalk. You can pick them right out of your field. You can pick them. You can pull them. You don't need to chemicalize them. That way you maintain clean water, because in the end, all water systems come from the groundwater, and all groundwater comes from the rainwater, and all the rainwater washes everything down into the groundwater. So you don't want to poison it. That's why there's so much the groundwater in Wisconsin right now, because of those pig farms and those cow farms, and in North Carolina and South Carolina, those pork farms. The water's leaching right down into the groundwater and poisoning your groundwater. We got to stop that stuff. We can't keep doing that. Actually, we should have water purification treatment plants for all farming feces now, because the cows, there's so many, I think there's something like 1.5 billion cows in the United States of America, and they're all, on average, defecating around 50 pounds of feces every day. And they're urinating somewhere between 30-40 gallons of water. And it's just unbelievable how much waste. And so we got to come to terms with that, Mark. Otherwise, we're just going to poison the daylights. And then everybody's wondering why we have so much cancer. Well, it's because we're poisoning our world, and that's poisoning our bodies, and our bodies react to all these poisons. It's called aberrant cell behavior. That means the cell in the bodies can't have healthy cells, so the cancer cells move in, and we are all, everybody listening here has probably either had cancer and or knows a friend who's had cancer. I had 3 friends die of cancer just in June before the summer came on, and I went to 3 funerals. So I'm very much aware of all that.
It's interesting that you said there were 1.5 billion cows in the U.S. My little scenario that I talked about at the beginning of the show, with 7 billion cows, isn't that far off. We're already almost doing it.
Yeah, we're the biggest meat eaters on the planet here in this country.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, nobody else can afford it like we afford it, but we're not going to be able to afford it much longer.
My goodness, it's just staggering. This is, you get this information comes like a fire hose, and it takes a while to just pick it all apart and try to put it in perspective. Were you at one time connected with some group in Oregon that was, I don't know, were they talking about splitting off from the U.S. or something, or am I just imagining things?
There's actually not in Oregon at this point. Montana is more likely to split from the United States. At some point. Yeah, Montana would be that. But there is a talk that Northern California is going to split from Southern California, because Northern California doesn't think like Southern California.
Right.
Northern California is quite conservative, and Southern California is just one big free ride of liberalism. And the problem is with socialism that comes with liberalism, at some point you don't have enough horses pulling the wagon to sustain everybody who's riding the wagon. And of course, California is just about as broke as any state can be right now. And it's got literally millions on welfare. And in fact, the people that are on welfare, their job is to vote the people into office that will keep giving them more welfare. And therefore, they don't have to work. And there's millions of people that don't care to work, don't want to work, or can't work. And so they don't mind all the welfare, and they'll sit on their butts and they'll just take their welfare checks and their EBT cards and their Section 8 housing while the rest of us work. And that's just the way it is.
You know, Stoey, I think people that aren't working like this, though, that are intentionally not working, that kind of behavior leads to depression, ultimately.
I would agree that anyone that doesn't work, and I've worked since I was 11 years old as a paper boy, and I mowed lawns for 25 cents a lawn. I became a short order cook working for 60 cents an hour. I was a lifeguard and a pool cleaner for 75 cents an hour. I've certainly been a dishwasher for 60 cents an hour. I've been a door checker for $3 an hour. I was a bartender, and I actually made some pretty good money as a bartender. I was a teacher making $5 an hour when I was a teacher, math and science teacher. Then I was a truck driver, and I made $40 an hour as a truck driver when I drove for United Van Lines out of Detroit way back in 1978 with Corrigan Moving Systems. And that's actually how I made my money. I was starving to death as a teacher, making $5 an hour. And that's with 2 college degrees, both an undergraduate and a postgraduate degree. It shows you how much my education did for me, because I became a truck driver, and then I drove for United for 30 years. I still have my CDL, as a matter of fact.
Wow. Commercial
driver's license. And so, you know, we all have to work. And the only way that a society can really move forward is that everybody is contributing to those who are unable to work, like those who are crippled or intellectually or mentally or emotionally deficit or whatever. But for the most part, all able-bodied people in the world need work, and work needs to be a part of their lives. And because it does give purpose, and it gives a reason to get up in the daytime, and then you get to associate with your community, and then you get to be a part of your community. I think work's the best thing you can do for yourself, because those who don't have to work, or those that don't work, are simply fragmented away from or disenfranchised from our society. And after a while, it's even when I was a ski bum in Winter Park, Colorado, I was a bartender. It was great to go to work, and I taught dance, and it was great to see people laugh because they love to learn how to dance. So work is a very important part of life, and it's important that we all contribute so each person can have a fulfilling life. And if you don't like the work you're in, then move toward the work that you like, because there's always work that you like. You just have to move toward it, and it might take you 5 or 10 years. I've always loved to be a writer. It took me, my first book that published took me 22 years. I had 8 books that all of them failed. And then finally, 22 years later, I never gave up. And my first book published, and then my second book published. And now my 14th and 15th books will publish coming up this coming year. And so I worked as a truck driver to become the writer that I wanted to be. And I can tell you, in the arts, most people who are an artist or a writer or a drawer or a sculptor or a painter or whatever they are, they all have second jobs. Well, mine happened to be a truck driver for United Van Lines, and I worked my full head off. I worked 100 hours a week. And although, you know, the drivers out there know that you can only work 70 hours a week, well, I volunteered 30 hours a week so I could, keep that rig on the road and loaded with 18 to 20 grand. I used to run a international, and I had a 48-footer. Then I went to a 53-footer, and I had a twin screw. I had a cab over. I've run conventionals. I've even run single source live floors, pavement operations. So I've worked hard in my life, and it's been a part of my life. And now that I'm older, I still work. Just that I call it dancing on the keyboard salt mine, and I enjoy it. And my next book coming out in January is Old Men Bicycling Across America. And the subtitle is A Journey Beyond Old Age. And everybody that rode across America with me last year, 4,500 miles, they were all 5 guys, all over 70.
No kidding.
Yeah, all over 70, and everybody at 70 has got different issues that somebody at 25 or 30 has got, because when you're 70, you've got high blood pressure, you're overweight, you're bald, you got gray hair, you got a gray beard. The 5 guys on the cover, they're all gray and bald-headed and bearded and the whole thing, and they got diabetes, they got overweight problems, they got sore joints, they got bad knees. 2 of my buddies have got steel knees, and they still bicycled across America with steel knees. And so I factor that in. But my book addresses all the baby boomers out there that want to do something epic with their lives. And so Old Men Bicycling Across America is going to inspire, it could inspire 80 million baby boomers, both men and women, because at the end of the book, I show them how to buy a bike, the right bike, how to camp, how to navigate, how to get the right map. I show them everything so that they too can, if they feel like it, they can ride across America even after the age of 70.
So what do you think is causing all of this depression that is causing these suicides with people?
I think in the end, what I have found as a teacher, also a truck driver for United Van Lines, watching families, watching divorce rates, as I did from 77 right through till 2005 when I retired from trucking, is that we now have had for the last 35, 40 years, we've had an average of 55 to 60+% of families have ended in divorce. So all of these children today are products of divorce, and so you lose the structure of the family unit. 7 out of 10 African American children are born without a father, and they live with a single mother on welfare. I don't know what the figures are for whites. I don't know what the figures are for Hispanics, but they're pretty bad. At least 50%, and as high as 70%. So what you have is a disassociation and a lack of identity. And so often, and especially, we also have a very multicultural society, so you have a lack of identity if you're a foreigner. I mean, there's 45 million people in this country right now that weren't even born here. So they don't have any kind of identity as Americans. And so the children don't know what to do because they're not, I've known Chinese kids that come to this country that are, adopted from China. And of course, they get called all sorts of names. So then you have racial conflict and you have racial identity. And that gets to be depressing. And then you've got social media that attacks kids left and right. So we have lack of identity. We have lack of community cohesion. We have 50 to 60 to 70% divorce rates. These kids do not have a father.
It's even higher, isn't it? In some cases, it's like.
Oh yeah, I'm giving you the conservative estimates.
Yeah.
And then you have the ghettos where you have just total hopelessness, and you have tremendous illiteracy rates, and then you have all of these kids on smartphones, and they can see all the money and all the rich, and everybody's driving a Lexus and so forth, and they can't have it. Well, that's pretty depressing. And then you have so many kids that don't get educations. The percentage of children not graduated from high schools is 40, 50, 60% in the ghettos.
Wow.
70, 80%. In Detroit, Michigan, it was 78%.
My goodness.
So you have very uneducated people doing jobs that are very redundant, and it gets to be very depressing because they can't go any further, and they never will go any further because they don't have the education. And so they are essentially illiterate in a highly technical world. So they get left behind. And so when you get left behind financially, and then you don't have somebody, you can't, if you're a guy that you can't even have enough money, you certainly can't get married. and so you're left out of girlfriends and dating, or the girl's left out of dating a boyfriend, you get depressed. And so depressed people literally at some point kill themselves. And obviously 44,900, I think 65 suicides last year in 2017. I just did a story on it. And so that's some of the reasons that people are committing suicide in this. Oh, and there's also old people that are committing suicide. And in fact, I think suicide over 65 is the #1 killer of senior citizens, because they've lost their reason or will to live, because they've quit their jobs, or they've been retired out of their jobs, so they don't have much of a reason, and then they don't have any reason, or they didn't pick up any kind of something to do to fill their time. So they're watching TV, they get depressed, and then they just kill themselves. So there's many reasons, but I think I've gone over a few of them that are pretty much that's what's happening.
Well, we're out of time, Frosty. Thanks so much for coming on. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.